Okay, so we talk a lot about triple net leases without, in some cases, really understanding what they are. So next slide, please. Before we talk about triple net leases, we ought to talk about other types of leases so we understand what a triple net lease is. So there are different kinds of triple net leases because the definition is not always clear. So the first one is an absolute triple net lease. That means the landlord has no responsibility whatsoever, and all expenses of the property are paid by the tenant. A double net lease, you've probably seen leases, net leases that say that the landlord is responsible for roof and structure, or roof structure and foundation. That's called a double net lease. Although a lot of brokers who don't really know put it out as a triple net lease. It is not a triple net lease, because if the landlord is paying for anything, it's not really a triple net lease, even though you'll see it promoted as a triple net lease. A net lease is where the tenant pays. First of all, what are the three? Why is it called triple net? The tenant pays insurance, the tenant pays maintenance, including building maintenance, and the tenant pays property taxes. Those are normally in a different kind of structure, responsibilities of the landlord. But a triple net, so the three things are insurance, maintenance, taxes. In a double net lease, the tenant pays insurance and taxes, landlord pays building maintenance. In a net lease, the tenant pays property taxes, but the landlord is responsible for insurance and maintenance. A gross lease is just the opposite of a triple net lease. A gross lease is where the landlord pays everything and the tenant pays nothing. And that's typically used in offices. And the tenant is responsible for his utilities and maintenance of his suite. Landlord pays everything else. That's a gross lease. A modified gross lease is what I just said a gross lease was, except there's a base year. The first year of the lease is called the base year, and each year after that, the tenant pays any increases in operating expenses from the base year. That's a modified gross lease. We're going to stay in the realm of the first three in our talk today. Next slide, please. Now the cap rate one. Isn't it? Am I in the right? No, I'm wrong. Go back. Who buys triple net lease? Okay, who is your buyer of a triple net lease? Your buyers are typically 1031 exchange buyers. Somebody owns a shopping center, or they own an apartment building. They have been involved in the day-to-day management, or they hire a management company, but it's intensive management. Multi-tenant properties generally are. But so he decides to sell his property, and he doesn't want management anymore. What he wants is to get a check every month and not have to worry about anything. So I do a lot of 1031 exchange buyers into triple net leases. particularly as clients get older, they just don't want to be bothered with management. And they've accumulated funds in other properties that they can use to trade into tax-free or tax-deferred exchange into triple net leases. Number two, doesn't have to be a 1031 exchange buyer. Any investor who wants a management-free investment can buy a triple net lease and have an income and no management. Triple net REITs, there are REITs out there who just buy triple net leases. And if you're in a triple net business, you're going to be in touch with those REITs. And to see what they're buying or what they're looking for, if you have a property you want to present to them. And lastly, who buys triple net leases? Anybody. Anyone who just needs to have a management-free investment can buy a triple net lease. A lot of people aren't educated about what a triple net lease is. I'm going to do that for you today, give you a speed course in triple net leases. So triple net leases come out at a cap rate. What are the determinants of that cap rate? Is that just a number picked out of the air? Is it a number that the seller needs to have to pay off some debt? How do you determine what a cap rate is when you bring out a property? Does anyone want to volunteer? Yeah. Correct. That's how you determine the cap, what the cap rate is. But the question is, if you take the price of the property, divide it into the income, you're going to get a cap rate. Where do you get the price? So what you need to consider is that when you bring a triple net lease to market, you need to know where the cap rate is, because if you don't, you're not going to sell that property quickly. An example is I met with, I don't know, there were 4 Taco Bells a month or 2 ago, and he wanted me to bring out, I was looking for the listing. He wanted me to bring the property out at a sub-4 cap rate. 3.75 is what he wanted. I told him that I can't waste my time because I'm going to be marketing, I'm going to be trying to sell this property, and there are not going to be no buyers at that cap rate. So he got somebody else at Marcus and Millichap to market the property at a 3.9. Property has been on the market for about 90 days now, and they don't have one offer. So if you aren't familiar with what the market cap rate is, you're going to do your client a disservice, as I believe Marcus and Millichap did in this case. So next slide, please. So the determinants of cap rate are: how strong is the lease? Is it a corporate lease signed by the company that Taco Bell Inc. or Wendy's Inc.? Or is it a franchisee signature? If it's a franchisee, well, first of all, if it's a corporate signature, how strong is the corporation? What is the trend? If it's a public company, it's easy. You can look at their financials, you can see the trend. Are they trending up or trending down? You know, 2 years ago, if I had a Best Buy lease, everybody would have thought that was a fantastic lease. But if you had gone to the financials and you would have seen that Best Buy's income every year for the last 5 years has declined, you'd be concerned about selling that lease. So Best Buy is probably going to either go bankrupt or is going to have to sell off a significant part of the company to survive. I am sorry, I do not mean Best Buy. I mean Bed Bath and Beyond. Right, Best Buy is a good company. Bed Bath and Beyond is what so the strength of the lease is a determinant of cap rate. How long is the lease? Is it a 4-year lease or a 20-year lease? A determinant of cap rate. Type of lease. Type of lease. Is it a double net lease or is it a triple net lease? Absolute triple net lease. What are the landlord responsibilities? That's a determinant of cap rate. Location. Is it in a town of 13,000, which is 35 miles from the nearest city? Or is it in an urban area where there's lots of people around? A determinant of cap rate. And lastly, the market. If you're going to sell a Wendy's and you've got a franchisee who will enter into a new 20-year triple net lease with you. So what's the first thing you're going to do? You're going to look at the market and see what other Wendy's triple net leases are on the market and what are the cap rates for those. So these are the factors that go into determining the cap rate. And if you aren't familiar with how to determine the cap rate, and your client says to you, I want you to bring out this property at 375 cap rate, and you aren't familiar with what the market is, you're going to be sitting there a long time trying to sell that property at that cap rate. You're going to do your client a disservice. He's going to be upset with you. I would rather turn down the listing than fool my client. I tell them the truth. In this particular case, I told the client that it was a 4.25, 4.5 cap deal. And if he wants to try to bring it out at 375 or sub 4, it's not going to sell. Well, I think some of you may have been here when I discussed that at one of the commercial meetings. I'd rather tell them that and have them go to somebody else and waste my time. So that's an idea of how you determine cap rate. Next slide, please. So what are the critical clauses that you should really have in a triple net lease? I'm in the process now with a client of buying a property where the lease, there's 8.5 years remaining on a 10-year lease. The lease is terribly written, vague as to what the real responsibilities of the tenant are, vague as to what happens at the expiration of the lease and the renewal options. So we decided that we're going to submit to the tenant a lease amendment to clarify some of these issues. And our deal is the tenant agrees to the amendment or we don't buy the deal. So because having a vague lease is a sure road to litigation at some point. So we're submitting this. The tenant has no incentive to why, you know, the tenant is saying, well, why should I change the lease? I like it the way it is. So our seller is going to have to give incentive to the tenant to take the lease amendment. And we're waiting for that to happen. But you can't just, because it says is that lease, you can't do that deal if you want clarity in terms of who's responsible for what. So what I like to have in a triple net lease, in a lot of cases, I get to be involved in the creation of the lease. In many cases, not. I have to accept the lease that exists. But a lot of franchisees will sell a property and are willing to enter into a new lease with you. Or I do sale leasebacks where I go to a company and I talk to them about freeing up all the capital they have in their real estate and using that in the operation of the business. You know, in the real estate, they're earning 5-6%. In their business, they can earn 25-30% on the money. And I do an analysis for them, and I suggest that they can stay in the factory or the building, whatever it is, but give us a 20-year lease and take all the equity out and use it. So I get to be involved in the creation of that lease. So can we have the next slide? This is a clause that I put in all of my net leases. There is no question about whether this is a net lease or not. You define it. I could manage that, Sammy. So, well, I normally don't read slides. I'm going to read this. It says, this lease is intended by both landlord and tenant to be and shall be construed as an absolute net lease, commonly referred to as a net or triple net lease, pursuant to which all rent payments shall be absolutely net to landlord, and landlord shall not, under any circumstances or conditions, whether presently existing or hereafter arising, and whether foreseen or unforeseen by the party, be required to make any payment or expenditure of any kind whatsoever, or be under any other obligation or liability whatsoever, except as expressly set forth herein in connection with the premises. There is no doubt that's in a lease, is that it's a net lease. Next slide, please.
Hey, Gary, this is Austin. I have a quick question about that last clause.
Yeah, Austin.
First and foremost, thank you for presenting this very important information. I'm glad to hear there's a good group in the office and a good group on Zoom. You are the expert. You are one of my mentors. I appreciate you doing this. But a quick question on that last slide, Serena, if we can go back. Would this be stronger if we added more clarity specifically about the triple nets, insurance, property tax, and maintenance?
Oh, yeah, that's coming, Austin.
Ah, fantastic. I jumped the gun. I apologize.
Next slide, please. So what you have in triple net lease is base rent, and you have additional rent. Additional rent is everything the tenant pays other than the base rent. So you need to spell out, as Austin said, it is, in addition to saying it's a net lease and landlord has no responsibility, you want to clarify in the lease what it is that the tenant is going to pay for. So you have this clause that I always put in a net lease. In addition to the base rent, tenants shall also pay and discharge as and when due and payable all amounts set forth in this case, it was Article 3, property taxes, other taxes, assessments, and utilities. In Article 6, repairs and maintenance. And Article 7, insurance. Herein, and all other amounts, liabilities, and obligations which tenant agrees to pay under this lease. This is collectively the additional rent. And the payment date for any of the foregoing shall be that date on which such amount becomes due. There are a couple of ways to do this. If you have the tenant pay it directly, he's got to pay it when it's due. In some cases, you can take what the triple net costs are. If you as a landlord want to pay them, bill the tenant monthly on an estimated basis and then settle it up at the end of the year. So, Austin, there's your clause about specific payments that the tenant has to make.
I love it. Thank you.
Next slide, please. Okay, so now we need some other clauses that need to be in a triple net lease. A lot of leases provide for increases in property tax by the assessor on an annual basis that is increased, but omit what happens in the event of a sale. So what could happen is then if you take a buyer to buy a triple net lease, and let's say the taxes are $50,000 a year, because when it was originally purchased, it was $5 million. I'm just using round numbers. Now your buyer comes in and he's going to pay $10 million for that property. And the property taxes are going to go up from $50,000 to $100,000. If the lease is not written properly, the landlord is going to wind up paying that $50,000. So you've got to be sure that the property tax clause covers increases in property tax due to sale of property. You got to have a provision for estoppels. If you're going to sell the property or refinance the property, you're going to need an estoppel certificate. A lot of leases, by the way, there are some attorneys who do great triple net leases. Many do not know what provisions to put in a triple net lease, and they do lousy leases, or they do leases that can lead to trouble later on. So what's an estoppel? Does everybody know? No? An estoppel is a certificate that is signed by the tenant that says the items in the lease are correct. Our rent is this, the lease expires here, we pay this much additional, and we have these many renewal options, and it's a confirmation of the terms of the lease. If you're a buyer or representing a buyer of a net lease property, and you don't have a tenant sign an estoppel confirming the terms of the lease, you can have some big trouble, and I've seen that happen in several instances. So, provision for an SNDA. Who knows what an SNDA is? Okay, if you're going to finance a property, one of the things the lender is going to want to have is an SNDA. SNDA stands for Subordination, Non-Disturbance, and Attornment. It's a subordination, non-disturbance, and attornment agreement. And what it says to the tenant is, tenant, your lease is subordinate to our loan. But we're not going to disturb you as long as the rent is paid. And we're going to, and you're going to atone to us the fact that you recognize that we're a superior lien, and but that you have use of the premises while the loan is in good standing. You can't finance a property without an SNDA. So if you don't have an SNDA clause in a triple net lease, you're gonna, and you want to refinance, and your tenant says, I'm not going to give you that. Although it's really for the benefit of the tenant. But I've had tenants say, no, we're not going to give you an SNDA. Okay, there goes your loan. Can't finance it without it. You got to have a provision for an SNDA in the lease. Provision for financial statements. This is rare. I've seen so many triple net leases where the tenant doesn't have to report store sales, so the tenant doesn't have to provide financial statements. You go along 5, 10, 12 years, and the tenant goes under. You had no knowledge of what was going on with that tenant. Store sales are a good indication of what's happening. So at the very minimum, you want the tenant to report store sales on an annual basis. But you also want to try to get financial statements of that tenant. You want to know what's going on with that tenant. If he's heading for trouble, you want to be prepared and be ready with another tenant to take his place if necessary. And you're not going to know that unless you have his financial statements. So you want to make sure that in a triple net lease, you've got a provision for the tenant to provide financial statements and or store sales. I told you that we had some, we have this lease that we submitted to the tenant an amendment because it was vague. No provision for default in that lease. Tenant defaults, what happens? It depends on what the law is in that particular state or location, because the lease did not spell out what happens in the event of default. That's another provision you've got to make sure you have. Oh, requirements at the end of occupancy. Does the tenant remove all of his equipment and tenant improvements when he leaves? Does he leave it broom clean? Does he have to leave the equipment? This needs to be spelled out in the lease. So you want to make sure you've got what happens when the tenant leaves. What's his responsibility? What's the landlord's responsibility? How much notice does he have to give you? I didn't put that in. But if the tenant's going to give you a 30-day notice that he's not renewing the lease, you're in trouble. I like to have a 12-month notice. So I've got 12 months before his lease expires to get another tenant in. So you need a notice provision as to whether that tenant is going to renew or leave at the end of the initial lease term. Next slide, please. An attornment provision, I talked to you about that. An SNDA does that, but you also want to have an attornment provision in the lease. Compliance with mortgage documents. When you take out a loan, your lender is going to have certain requirements that the tenant must do. If you don't have in the lease that the tenant has to comply with requests of the lender or with mortgage documents, you're also going to have a problem with your lender. Can the tenant sublease? Does he have the right to sublease? If he wants to leave? And if he subleases and the rent is higher than he's paying, who gets the difference? That needs to be spelled out in the lease. Can't be a vague item. Environmental matters. I've seen so many triple net leases that don't even speak about environmental issues. And you want to have a provision in your lease that the tenant is responsible and indemnifies the landlord against any environmental hazards created by the tenant during his occupancy. Rarely see that in a lease. We make sure it's in our leases. Defined terms. So when you do a lease, you're going to talk about different things. Environmental matters. What is an environmental matter? So you need to define what that is. You talk about maintenance. What maintenance? What is he responsible for? Is he responsible for the HVAC or not? Define in the defined terms section of the lease what that is. Schedule of insurance. You want to make sure that your tenant is carrying insurance that's going to protect you, the landlord, in the event of a casualty or a slip and fall liability. You know that if somebody slips and falls in your property, you're the landlord, they may sue the tenant, but they're going to sue you too, because they expect that you've got deep pockets or deep insurance pockets. So you want to make sure, and you as the landlord on a triple net lease aren't paying for insurance. You want the tenant to pay for it. That's why you have to spell out in the lease exactly what coverage the tenant has to have. Next slide, please. Should you represent a buyer or a seller of a triple net lease? Maybe you should, and maybe not. Dealing in triple net leases, which I've been doing for 35 years now, requires knowledge that if you don't have, you do a disservice to your client. So your objective is to please your client, so you retain it. You don't want to put him into a bad transaction. So you develop expertise by doing something over time and learning it, learning how to do it, which is what I've done. They say it takes 10,000 hours of experience before you become an expert in any particular field. So if you haven't spent 10,000 hours doing triple net leases, leave it to the experts. Hire somebody that specializes in it and get a referral fee. You don't, excuse me. You don't have to do, excuse me. You don't have to do anything except collect the fee at the closing. So I've seen too many agents get involved in triple net leases, not really knowing all of the elements of it, and have done damage to their clients. So my recommendation is, I'm not saying just me, I do specialize in it. I think we have one or two other people in the office that do. But refer it to somebody who knows what they're doing. Get a referral fee. Is there another slide? Yeah, just my contact. Okay, so that in a nutshell is triple net leases. So does anybody have any questions? Yes,
Gary, when you talk about the tenant carrying the insurance, do you determine the amount of insurance they should carry based on, what do you base that on? And you put that into the contract?
is that Seppi?
I'm right here, sorry, I'm like right in front of you,
Okay,
in the room, right here.
can you speak of the letter, because I didn't hear.
So you mentioned that the tenant has to carry the insurance.
Yeah.
In the lease. Do you determine the price, the amount of the
Coverages,
insurance, the coverage that they should carry, and do you include that into the contract? Based on-
absolutely.
What do you base that on, square footage or?
No. The insurance company will determine what the,
based on use?
yeah. So what I do is we determine a replacement cost. So we want the insurance to cover replacing the building. Let's say the building burns down in a fire. We want that building replaced. So replacement cost is typically the amount for fire and casualty. I want business interruption insurance, tenant to carry. There's a fire, tenants out. What about my rent? So I want a rent replacement insurance, normally called business interruption, where the insurance company will pay my rent while they're repairing the building. I want liability, probably $2 million for each accident, so that the tenant is covered in the event something happens in the facility and there's a lawsuit. So yes, we specify what insurance coverage is needed.
I have another question. So the provision for the financial statement, you mentioned that you would have them provide you the store sales on an annual basis on the lease. Do you have the provision for financial statement quarterly, or do you
Oh,
kind of prepare yourself?
annual is fine. I do it annually. Yes, Sammy.
I just want to follow on that question. I just want to ask you that question. How imperative this clause is in the lease agreement, which with respect to, if I was a business owner, I wouldn't want to give my financial statement to my landlord for various reasons. You know, I mean, is that
A lot of tenants understand, the major corporations understand that you want, I should have gotten good water. Sorry. The major corporations understand that you need financial statements, and they'll typically provide them. We're doing a triple net deal with RadNet right now, which is an imaging company. We had a little resistance, but they're providing us with the financial statement. A mom and pop, a franchisee who has 3 or 4 units, you may have difficulty getting a financial statement from them, but store sales will give you an indication.
it's not a deal maker, but a deal breaker, basically.
Thank you.
You don't think it's a deal breaker?
It's not a deal breaker, but in a lot of cases, the guy who drew the lease didn't provide for it, and you either have to fight with a tenant or live without it. Yes, Wilma.
What form do you use to prepare your leases with the nets?
I don't use a form.
It's just out of you write it out yourself.
If you use a form lease, and I've seen many of them, it's not going to cover everything that you need to
There
cover.
doesn't have it in there.
What?
AIR doesn't have it in there. Like specific.
I'm sorry, say it
The
again.
AIR form.
AIR form doesn't cover it either. It's a general lease. It doesn't cover specifics that you need in a triple net lease. Kevin?
You mentioned the lease agreement is not suitable for the buyer, usually you go to negotiate and you just handle it. What are the incentives? or the landlord is able to offer, let's say, a corporation. for example,
We're doing, I said, we're doing negotiating a deal with BradNet right now. That's the company we submitted lease amendment to. What is the incentive for the tenant to do it? Seller's gonna pay him some money. Green, that's the incentive.
Hey, Gary,
Yes,
I just wanted to touch or hit again your last slide about sending referrals. And Serena, if Serena's there, Serena, can you give me screen share capabilities, please?
To commercial, you want to make sure, you know, even if it's for 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, as long as there's an end date, you'll still receive, and you could always renegotiate the referral fee. But with all contracts, all term, all listing agreements, you must have an end date. You have a termination date. It's invalid
Oh, okay,
otherwise.
thank you.
And just
I have a question.
to let everybody know very quickly, that was Michael Rosales. So for those of you that are new, he is our broker of record. So what he says is his law. So just remember.
Oh, okay.
It's more risk management.
Yes.
You know, my job is to keep us out of, I want to say harm's way, or the legal harm's way. So just as Austin said, if you're not a commercial broker, commercial agent, stay in your lane, refer it out. It's, besides it being against the code of ethics, from a risk management perspective, it's, you know, you don't want to get involved doing it. And if you want to learn commercial, that's great. I mean, we have a really strong commercial division that's just been excelling. So, but that's another topic for Austin to comment on.
Okay.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah,
Can
go.
you hear me? My question
I hear you.
is, if you have a client who wants to sell their business, and their example, they're a dentist and they want to sell, could they go into triple net lease purchase as an option for a 1031 for their business?
no. If they're
And
selling.
we don't sell
the-
businesses.
Yeah, if they just sell the business, they're not selling real estate, they can't 1031 into real estate.
Ah,
And also, more importantly, Michael just said that as well. So even though as a real estate licensee, we are all legally allowed to sell businesses, in our office, Keller Williams Beverly Hills, our E&O insurance policy does not cover business sales, business opportunity sales. So we are not allowed to sell businesses or buy businesses on behalf of our clients in our office. If there are extenuating circumstances,
Go ahead.
you talk to Michael or Josh or myself, and we might be able to figure something out.
Yeah, and we could refer it out to a business broker. That being said, property management, we're not allowed to do property management. If some of you have your own properties that you inherently do property management for, we have a waiver that we require the person to sign. And remember, no property management either.
Michael, just very quickly though, to add on to that, unless you as an agent or real estate licensee are a direct employee of that property owner, correct?
Yeah, and I said if it's your own property, or you know, if it's a family property.
Okay.
so does that mean if I rent one of my properties, then I cannot manage it?
No, we just said if it's your property, if it's a family, if it's your, you know, if your mother's property, you know, you can do that. We just have a waiver. You're not in the business of property management for other clients. I mean,
Sure.
this is a risk management. E&O insurance doesn't cover property management. Our ICA agreements prohibit it. But there are situations where it can be allowed, and you know, the office just has a release agreement that we want you to sign if you're doing it for your own personal person or your family. I'm heading into a garage, so I may lose you all. But thank you, Gary, for this great, and I hope to have more of these
Well, thank you, Michael.
discussions.
Hey, and Ella, just to close the loop on that, I mean, property management is one of those categories that was identified in the National Association of Realtors Code of Ethics, Article 11. So property management is a very specific expertise. And so if you have questions, go see Michael and or myself.
Any questions?
Thank
here?
you.
All right, thank you, everybody.
Hey, Gary, thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Very informative.
Thank you so much.
And those people who haven't seen this whole thing, it will be, it's recorded. So I recommend reviewing it again because a lot of good information.
Heck yeah. Thanks, guys. Have a great weekend.